Welcome to the recorded version of Senior Nutrition and Mealtime, part of the Family Caregiver Support webinar series brought to you by the American Society on Aging and a generous sponsorship from Home Instead Senior Care.
All right, our speaker today is going to be Molly Carpenter. Author, speaker, trainer, and family caregiver, Molly Carpenter brings years of personal and professional senior care experience and training to families dealing with dementia care. In her current role, Molly works with the team responsible for ensuring that the Home Instead Senior Care Network's 60,000 caregivers worldwide have the resources necessary to effectively provide quality care in the home and understand the importance of their work enhancing the lives of those that they serve. Molly holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Family Science with a gerontology specialization from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and a master's degree in education with a gerontology specialization from the University of Nebraska-Omaha. And with that, I would like to welcome our main presenter for today, Molly Carpenter. Thanks for being here again with us, Molly. Welcome.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, everybody, for joining today's webinar. Welcome. I'm feeling very good today because I just love this topic. I'm also feeling great because it's finally summer where I'm at. I hope it's nice, hot, and summer in your area and your neck of the woods as well. But let's get started, and I just want to talk a little bit about nutrition today. We're actually going to talk a lot about nutrition today because, let's face it, we hear so much about it, and we probably talk a lot about it in our daily activities. But it's everywhere you go. It's in magazines, the internet, newspaper. Food and nutrition, they're a huge part of our culture and a huge part of our day. We place a really big emphasis on food and diets and grocery shopping and going out to dinner, and even think about all those social events you go to. They're all centered around food mostly, at least most of mine are. I was reading a report the other day, and it was from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they looked at 3 years of data. And this was the interesting stat I found. On an average day, we spend close to 3 hours eating and drinking. 3 hours. Now, half of that time is spent on things like preparing the food or driving to a restaurant, but 3 hours a day out of our whole day. And when we think about our family caregivers, 83% of our family caregivers are helping with meal preparation, groceries, and 65% of family caregivers are even assisting with the meal preparation. So what's causing our family caregivers to have to help so much with that meal prep and grocery shopping? Well, aging and our seniors' ability to maintain good nutrition, there are some challenges there, and we're going to discuss all those today, but things like chronic illness and eyesight and taste buds, they all affect those nutritional habits. And so knowing how important good nutrition and proper hydration is to all of us, even as a person gets older, it's super important. And so as we go through the slides today, you're going to see why this is such an important topic. So let's get to the next slide and look at the objectives that we're going to cover today. So during this webinar, we're going to discuss why nutrition is so important. I think you probably all have a lot of good clues, but it really is one of those super important topics that I think gets overlooked a lot. It's a topic that most people don't think really have a big impact. But we're going to look at those causes of malnutrition. We're going to talk about warning signs so that we can help our family caregivers look for those signs when they're caring for their senior loved ones. We're going to talk about tips and techniques that our family caregivers can use to help their senior loved one or their care recipient to maintain that proper nutrition. And we're going to talk about meal prep and hydration suggestions, even shopping. And a new thing this year we're going to talk about is how to make more of Mealtime an event and a planned event and at least a weekly occurrence. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then there's a few specific chronic illnesses that have a major impact on nutrition, and those are Alzheimer's disease and diabetes. And so we will spend a couple minutes just on those two chronic illnesses as well and talk about some tips around for family caregivers around managing and proper nutrition with those types of chronic illness. So first, I want to talk about the physical factors that can influence nutrition on the next slide. And so when we talk about the physical factors, we're talking about a senior, and we're talking about what physically is causing or can cause some nutrition concerns. And the first one, obviously, chronic illness. As we age, our bodies and our internal systems, they slow, they change. Illnesses can pop up that can require a modification in what we eat or can't eat. And oftentimes, we don't have the same get up and go that we even had in midlife, and so our metabolism is slowed a little bit. And think about it. When a senior has a chronic illness such as arthritis, they have continual pain, which may affect their ability to shop and prepare food. Maybe they don't feel like getting up and going to the store as regularly, for example. Chronic illness also can suppress an appetite, even though these illnesses usually require even more nutrients from their body. So it may suppress the appetite, not feeling good because they might be in some pain. But if the hard part is that when you have a chronic illness, you need even more nutrients. Chewing and swallowing, another physical factor that can influence nutrition. Now, dental problems are common, and that are a common factor that can affect nutrition. Things like poorly fitted dentures, cavities, gum problems, all can affect the taste and the ability to chew. Dry mouth is something to consider. That certain medications can cause dry mouth. It could just be a factor as well that needs to be taken into consideration. And then side effects of medications. There's things, medications can sometimes make food taste different and taste funny. So that's another, when we think about chewing and swallowing and our taste buds, things have changed. And then we got to think about absorbing nutrients. Now, the production of digestive enzymes and acids, it diminishes as we age, which what that means is it makes it a lot harder for us to break down protein and absorb those key vitamins such as B12 or folate and sometimes calcium and iron. And so when the body can't absorb those crucial vitamins, it can impact that nervous system. And when the nervous system is impacted, we get to the unsteady gait, muscle weakness, mental alertness is changed, and poor circulation. So this is one of those examples where things happen to a senior and we never go back to nutrition, or we always think it's the disease or something else that's causing the issue, when really absorption, for example, could be one of the major factors why things are happening. So a lot of times we see seniors on lots of different vitamins, or they're taking those boost shakes or whatever kind of nutrient shakes they're taking because they have all those vitamins in them because they need all those extra vitamins. We talked a little bit about medications, how they can alter the food taste. They can make your stomach upset, so maybe you don't have the best appetite anymore. Certain meds like antibiotics and meds that reduce cholesterol or blood pressure can change the way food tastes. Okay. Hospitalization, another physical factor. When you're in the hospital, there's a lot of stress, and obviously there was a situation that caused you to get to the hospital. And just being in the hospital can cause that weakness. It can cause a loss of appetite, and let's face it, you just don't feel good. And when you don't feel good, you don't want to get up, and you don't want to move around, and you don't want to cook, and you don't want to grocery shop. And so even a hospitalization or after a hospitalization, a transition to home, very sensitive times for nutritional issues to pop up right then. And then we talked a little bit about taste, but we also, smell is another factor. Our senses are naturally declining as we age. So when we can't smell something, it doesn't always, it's very impacts the way things taste. So as our smell diminishes, so does the taste of something as well. And then seniors, they're a little bit, it depends on the senior, I should say, obviously, but lower activity levels could be a factor. Loss of muscle and fat itself can cause a loss of appetite due to the changes in the body chemistry. Again, that is something that people do not think about, is that just that loss of muscle and fat, it changes your body chemistry and changes how your body is reacting to food or not reacting or not getting the right nutrients. So consider that. That's a good lesson for all of us as well. Not eating enough of the right things can decrease energy. Think about the last time you ate a meal that probably wasn't good for you, or maybe you skipped lunch. How did you feel? I know I did that about a week ago. I skipped lunch, and I, by 3 o'clock, felt very tired, very spacey, zero energy. So when a senior's not eating enough even, you don't feel like doing anything. Okay, so let's talk about some social factors as well that can influence a senior's ability to maintain good nutrition habits on the next slide. Talked about the physical things. Let's talk about a few social things. Depression, top on the list. And, you know, sometimes seniors are low or they're down in the dumps, and it could be just loneliness. It could be grief. It could be just down in the dumps over an illness or related, their lack of mobility, or just things are different. And so when you aren't, you know, feeling great mentally, it can have an effect on your nutrition. Limited income is another thing to consider. Some of our seniors are on fixed incomes, and sometimes it comes down to a factor of choosing a lower cost food item. Those aren't usually the healthiest picks. You know, when you think about a lot of our high carb foods like macaroni and cheese, very reasonably priced, but not the healthiest thing to pick out of the grocery store. And when seniors have to choose between the cost of medications or between buying nutritious foods, well, you can imagine medication usually wins. And then there's restricted diets. Some of our seniors, they have dietary restrictions. It could be limiting fat. It could be limiting salt, sugar. And these are, you know, required usually for managing a chronic condition, but they could, you know, lead to that bland or unappealing food. And so I've seen it where seniors just don't eat as much anymore. Things don't taste good without salt in it, or they really want that sugar, and they're not supposed to have sugar because of diabetes, and so then they just don't eat anything. So again, it's really restricted diets are a major concern. Now, those are some social factors, but what about the actual art of socializing when you're eating? Do you think that influences nutrition? Let's take a look on the next slide, because obviously it does. If I read the quote on the slide, for most seniors, it's not what's on their plate matters most at mealtime. It's who is at the table. And I want you to think about that from your perspective as well. How many times it matters when you're socializing and when you're with a group of people or even one other person when you're eating. So when you have reduced social contact and a solitary life and maybe loneliness, or maybe your friends, you don't have as many friends, it can have an impact. Social contact has a really positive effect on eating, and it increases your morale and your well-being. And so think about how many times in the last week you have been out with a friend or a family and it's been related to a meal. I can tell you several times for me. And that social impact of nutrition is so important. And I think that it kind of, I think we take it for granted and we don't realize it. But I want you to picture yourself if you were out, you went to the nicest restaurant in your town or community and you went by yourself. What would that be like versus when you're with your family or you're with your spouse or your best friend? How does the experience completely differ? What are the differences between the two? So it's such an important topic, and I think it's one of those things that gets overlooked a lot. And so at Home Instead, we completed a national survey of 1,000 households in the United States and Canada to really identify the status of a family sit-down dinner. And, of course, we did this with families who have senior relatives aged 70 or older. So we applied this to the senior population. Let's take a look at some of the results on the next slide. Here's what we found, that 59% of family members who live nearby do not have Sunday dinner with relatives. 43% do not think that their senior loved ones are eating nutritious and balanced meals. And almost half of those surveyed report that their senior loved ones generally eat alone. Now, when we dug into this, we definitely put a slant on the Sunday dinner, okay? But this can definitely be applied to any day of the week, having a meal with somebody, a relative, a group of people getting together for a meal. When we looked at some of the reasons why families aren't eating together, scheduling issues was probably the top reason. That was almost half. And then 40% of the respondents said they didn't have. I can totally all have so much going with our lives outside of work, and it's really hard to make those times to get together. But it feels like the art of having a meal together is a lost art. And we have so many distractions with our phones and our cell phones. Even when we do live in the same household, it's hard to sit and eat together because of all those distractions. Now, I've read a lot of research on this topic, and we've done a lot of research here. And really, just to generalize some of the research that I've read and that we've been a part of at Homestead, the bottom line is that food just tastes better when you share a meal. You eat better, you enjoy it better, there's just so many positive things when you're sharing a meal. So I share this with you today. So as you are visiting with your family caregivers, at least encourage a one-time-a-week get-together with their senior loved one. Even if it can't be a Sunday dinner, maybe it's a lunch, maybe it's a breakfast, there's always time to find one meal a week, and because it's just so important to a senior eating a great balanced meal. Okay, so we know physical factors, we know social factors that can influence nutrition. All of this can help a family member spot an issue. Let's look at a summary of these signs on the next slide. So again, when we're thinking about the signs of poor nutrition, loss of appetite is a really big sign, especially if the person's always been a good eater or a hearty eater. But when we find a loss of appetite or the appetite has changed, an underlying illness could be the root cause. It could be the dentures that we talked about. It could be pain. It could be a lot of things, okay? So when a family recognizes that, there's some work to do, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Another warning sign is mood or changes in pattern. Depression is a common sign of poor nutrition. It can also lead to mood changes. If a person is flighty or spacey or just seems out of it, that could be a clue to poor nutrition. It could be a clue for a lot of things, but poor nutrition, or not eating right or enough food is a possible symptom as well. A sudden weight fluctuation, losing or gaining 10 pounds in a 6-month period, that would be a significant fluctuation. This could mean that something's not right, okay? It could be hard to spot 10 pounds, but that's where we look for all the cues in clothing. So again, encouraging families to pay attention to the clothing. I know with my grandmother, that's exactly how we could tell, is when earlier in her life when she needed new clothes because they were too tight in the waist and we could see how uncomfortable she was. Or later in life, we could see a lot of sagging and really baggy pants. So that was our other clue. So that was how we could tell a weight fluctuation. Because, seniors aren't going to tell the family caregivers, oh, hey, I've lost 10 pounds. They may not tell them that. So just some tips to share with families of what to look for. Skin tone. When older adults are eating properly, their skin should look healthy and well hydrated. Ashy or dull-looking skin is a sign of poor nutrition. And then cognitive problems. We talked about the flightiness or a change in cognition. Older people who live alone might forget to eat if they have dementia, and dementia and cognitive problems, they can lead to some nutritional deficiencies. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the webinar, though, a little closer. We've talked about medications as a warning sign. So when a person has more than 3 medications, they can be at risk for poor nutrition because that medication can influence the appetite and the weight. So just have to make sure to remind our families to be aware of side effects and anything, if the medication has a warning that it could change the taste of foods, dry mouth, whatever it is. So when a person's taking 3 or more that's just a heightened awareness that we need to encourage our family members to be aware of. Recent illness or hospital stay is another sign. There's always, that transition home, there's always potential for poor nutrition. And we've talked about poor nutrition leading to anemia and muscle weakness that can lead to falls and fractures. So if the person is more tired and lethargic, that is also a sign. Okay, so we need to share these signs with our families that we work with every day. And or you all, when you're working with seniors, you can notice some of these signs as well. So we know about the signs. Let's look at the next slide of what families should do if they notice the signs. Let's start talking about some solutions. So the first would really be to gain understanding about the situation. I think a lot of times it's easy, and I know when I say these things, it's from my own experience. So it's easy to really just assume you know what's going on, but we really have got to sit down and visit and talk with our senior loved one, our care recipient, and understand what could be contributing to or causing the poor habits. And when you talk together, that's when you can generate solutions together and resolve the situation. A lot of seniors are reluctant to talk about these issues because they could be embarrassed or they don't feel like it's important. With my grandma, she did not want to worry anybody, so she didn't want to talk about or tell us anything. And so we really have to take the time to assess. A lot of times people are surprised to learn that some of their health issues can be easily cleared up with just dietary changes. So encouraging that open conversation is really, really important. It's addressing the nutritional needs of older clients. It may be talking to the appropriate, including other family members into the conversation, everybody that's kind of involved in the care. The goal is to get the family all on the same page, supporting the senior and their care recipient. Now, the doctor, scheduling a visit with their doctor, if they've noticed any of the warning signs that we've discussed today or any of those other factors, it may be time to visit with a doctor. The doctor can review medications. They can, understand if it's a new symptom of an illness or it is medications. We need to encourage our family members to bring a med list and any of those signals or those factors that they've noticed about the poor nutrition. We also kind of want to encourage families to visit with dietitians or nutritionists. These professionals seem to be more and more available in communities, in the local grocery stores. A lot of those grocery stores have them on staff now. So it may be easier than we used to think to set up appointments with nutritional experts. And so encouraging families to visit with dietitians is a great step as well. And then if we think it's something, with the teeth, if the family notices they're chewing weird or maybe food's kind of falling out when they're eating, that could be dental or jaw problems. And that's where it'd be important to suggest a visit to the dentist. Okay? Now, on the next slide, I want us to look at some of the nutritional guidelines for seniors before we get into more of the tips and techniques of good nutrition. Now, here's just some general nutritional guidelines. Reducing sodium is always on this list, and it's preventing that water retention and high blood pressure. Got to monitor that fat intake, educating seniors about the difference between good and bad fats. So a lot of you will educate families on what that is. So the fat from olive oil and avocados or salmon, those can protect the body against heart disease by controlling that bad cholesterol and raising the good cholesterol. So there's just some education. I think the industry, we've gotten a lot better about educating just the general public about good and bad fats. But with seniors, they may not have heard that message. So again, reinforcing it with families, because I think about with my grandmother, she always used to cook with vegetable oil. She never used olive oil. So it was a pretty big transition to get her to switch from one or the other. But, talking through the differences and understanding it does the same thing and tastes pretty good, but that took a little bit of extra work. Calcium is another important nutritional guideline, very important for bone health. I think that's some of these on here, like fiber, the next one, obviously can help with sluggish digestive systems. Another guideline is, practicing or participating in regular physical activity, and then always consulting with a doctor around supplements and vitamins that may be best suited for the senior and their specific health needs. So these are just some nutritional guidelines, and if they look familiar to you, it's because they're very similar probably to what your doctor is telling you. I know they're pretty much everything the doctor tells me. So these are just good guidelines, again, to share with our families and share with the seniors that we serve. Okay, so we've talked about the issues, the warning signs, some guidelines. Let's look at the hydration guidelines on the next slide. Another one, I know a lot of you that work in communities for seniors, hydration is probably a big part of your day, helping the community residents stay hydrated. And it's so important. And it's even harder when somebody's at home. And so some of the hydration guidelines for seniors, and really these are kind of guidelines and or tips, but dehydration, it can lead to issues, and we've talked about them a little bit, that confusion, impaired cognition, falling, constipation, some of those things all can go back to hydration and poor hydration. So some of the tips is really to include fluids at each meal and snack. So always making sure there's water around or nutritional fluid around. Keeping a water close. Think about the special water bottle, maybe one that's pretty lightweight and easy to carry. That's a good idea. A lot of hospitals have those jugs that are real easy to use when you're in the hospital, so that's a great example of keeping water close. Enhancing water. Now, I think this is the new craze in the world. It's a craze in a lot of places I go. There's restaurants have even added splash of grape juice to water, or they've added lots of fruit to water, all kinds of different fruits to water, lemons and limes. I've seen kiwi, I've seen cucumbers. Anything to sort of enhance the flavor of a water is very helpful. Maybe that sparkling mineral water can be very helpful. A filtered water pitcher is another great idea. Always keep one in the fridge. It just keeps the water cold. It just tastes good. It just tastes different and it tastes good. So that's just another idea. There's also fruits, those water-based fruits like watermelon, other fruits, other veggies that are mostly made up of water. Or there's hydrating snacks like Jell-O and soup and pudding and popsicles and smoothies, those milkshakes that we talked about earlier like Ensure or Boost or whatever those are. So there's even some good hydrating snacks that we can think about. And what we need to encourage our family caregivers about is really watching that fruit juice, that sweet fruit juice that a lot of seniors drink, maybe even trying a reduced sugar version. Also watching the coffee intake. I know with my grandmother, she drank a lot of coffee in the morning, and she loved it, but she was also a person that kept the cold pitcher of water in the fridge. So I know she was getting enough water and drinking throughout the day. So it's just balancing that out. Okay, so we need to think about preparing and cooking meals because it's another important component to nutrition. And we always want to try to involve the senior if possible. So let's look at some of those tips on the next slides that hopefully our family caregivers can, work with their care recipient senior loved one on cooking. Now, obviously having all of this good food doesn't do an older adult any good if they don't enjoy cooking it or eating it. So we've talked to some nutritional experts throughout the years, and we really need to make eating a happy event. Sometimes we focus so much on what we can eat, we don't give enough attention to what food represents to us. Like, food is the core of our life. It's what keeps us going, our bodies going. And it's really about the aroma and the color and the texture and, again, that socializing. All of that is what makes mealtime so enjoyable. And so we got to remember that when we're cooking. We've got to make mealtime fun, okay? We've got to also watch those empty calories, okay? These are those foods where calories come from solid fats or added sugars, and they have no nutrients like sodas and sweets and chips. So we want to avoid some of those types of things when we're preparing meals. Soups are great ideas for cooking, and especially for a senior, for somebody who maybe has a mouth or gum issues, maybe the soups or soft food even, they require less chewing. They're also easy to prepare. They usually involve leftovers, which is great. You get more than one meal out of it. And it provides that hydration that we talked about on the previous slide. Another idea that we've learned over the years is mixing up meals. Many people love to have breakfast, and even though breakfast is usually a morning food, that doesn't mean you only have to eat it in the morning. Okay, so remind family caregivers about mixing up meals. You know, get some of those foods that they love for breakfast and have them at another time of day. Breakfast seems to be a favorite meal among seniors. So I don't know if our family caregivers think about that very often, that, wow, you know, you could have an omelet for dinner. That would be just fine, or an omelet and bran muffin and fresh fruit. I have pancakes for dinner. You know, there's all kinds of things that you can do. I know that in my experience working in different facilities, breakfast was always the most attended meal. Everybody was there on time and early. Everybody ate usually such a good breakfast. So it is such an important meal. It was my grandmother's favorite meal as well. So we did a lot of meals, breakfast, mixing it up at night and stuff. Also got to consider flavor and spice, you know, and variety. So encouraging families to plan and prepare a variety of foods can really keep that older adult interested in eating. Try natural flavor enhancers, some olive oil, vinegars, garlic, onions, spices, including cinnamon or cloves and ginger. These spices are also good for people who need to cut back on salt. And again, the goal is to move in the right direction. You're always going to have a little bit of salt in a meal, obviously. So it's just to get people to thinking in different ways. I don't know if you've all have seen in the store those flavor packets or meal starters. Now, you kind of have to be careful with those because of the amount of preservatives and sodium, but there are some that aren't as bad. There's some cream cheese starters, for example, that you can make an easy chicken enchilada. So there's a lot of organizations and companies are finding ways to make cooking meals earlier, and they're doing it with these flavor packets and meal starter kits. All right. The other idea is to help improve an older adult's nutrition is to assemble some healthy snacks at home, maybe using baggies or little Tupperware containers of low-fat cheese or cottage cheese, some baggies with nuts and seeds, maybe making sure the vegetables are cut up and the fruits, and rather than buying some of those prepackaged snacks, you know, the processed snacks. So just getting into a rhythm of having healthier snacks at home. Batch cooking is a great tip as well. Now, this is when the freezer allows enough space, obviously, and that the family caregiver has enough time. But this is really cooking large meals and dividing them up into smaller portions to have throughout the month or whenever. So cooking spaghetti sauce and dividing into smaller portions where they can pull out just a little container of sauce for another meal in the future. Okay, so lots of tips on cooking, but let's talk about grocery shopping as well. Let's look at that on the next slide, some tips for successful grocery shopping. Now, notice as we go through today, the goal is to give families help with mealtime, not to do everything for the person. Now, it's important to keep the senior involved, allowing them not only to have a say in the foods they eat, but involving them so they can understand the importance and really have a stake in this game, or this stake in, having control over their good nutrition. And as basic as this may sound, many people do not know how to make the trips to the grocery store more organized and productive. And so, I know a lot of you, or at least I have experienced, where you've gone to the grocery store and, the person wasn't interested and didn't want to go with you, and it turned into a big hassle. So you've really got to involve the person as you go along, and helping them understand why this is so important. Okay, so when you think about this, we've got to start with making a list, of course. And this helps the senior plan out what sounds good for the week, what kind of menu do they want to have, what kind of meals, those kind of things. It also helps with budget purposes. We've always heard this one a lot. Don't shop hungry when you're at the grocery store, because you might buy things that aren't necessarily great for you when you're starving. One thing my grandmother always did was clip the coupons for our family. And so whenever we went to the grocery store, she had the coupons. She would hand them out. She would say, here's this one, here's that, we need this, so on and so forth. So she had a role as well. Signing up for the discount card is important at all of our different grocery stores. Shopping the perimeter of the store. I'm really conscious about this one, and I think this is a great tip for families, is the fresh and the healthier foods are all on the outer aisles of the stores. Okay, the inner aisles are the more processed foods. Also encouraging to try store brands. They're usually very good and very similar to the name brands. This would just be something to suggest to somebody that may be watching the dollars. And then trying new foods. I think our generation of seniors, they're not used to, different meals, different like tacos, and some of those are favorite things. Of course, my favorite things are tacos and Chinese food and those kind of things. So really suggesting some different kind of foods might really get a senior more interested in eating and purchasing foods and getting involved in the meal. Now, there's some important staples that every senior's house should have on hand, and we want to encourage our families to understand these staples. So let's look at those on the next slide. Now, we start with oatmeal because it's a great source of fiber, and it's really been shown to lower blood cholesterol and reduce the risk of heart disease. And those are all very important things to older adults. And a lot of older adults like oatmeal, so it's just one of those staples to always have on hand. It's a pretty good, nutritious meal. Eggs are another one. Only 75 calories a serving and 13 essential vitamins and minerals, including the vitamin D. Really important to that absorbing calcium needed for bone strength, and they're very inexpensive. So those are just one of those staples to always have on hand. Yogurt, rich in calcium, good bacteria in some of those yogurts, so that could be helpful for people with digestive problems. And even that new Greek yogurt that's out has a lot more protein, so that's even better. Yogurt's gotten even better over the years. Blueberries. Now, a lot of times we suggest blueberries because of the research that is done around Alzheimer's disease, that blueberries can help improve memory and coordination. The blueberries are just a great fruit, and they've got lots of different nutrients. And the reason why it's a good thing to have on hand on a regular basis is because they're good fresh or frozen. So you can eat them pretty quickly when they're fresh or they're frozen. They're great to grab a handful of frozen blueberries and eat those as well. Apples is another one. That's where you've really got to look at the dental concerns, though, and maybe look at those packets that come pre-sliced. Fish is another great, important staple to have on hand. And a lot of older adults, if they're not cooking a whole lot or don't know how to prepare fish, even the tuna that we can buy in the little packets at the store, those are great for heart health. Chicken is a great source of a staple that should be on hand. Broccoli, I mean, you guys can look at these on the slide. There's just so many nutrients in those green vegetables. And even, broccoli isn't, some people don't love broccoli, but try adding Mrs. Dash or a little bit of flavoring to some of these veggies really can make the difference. Sweet potatoes and squash, excellent staples to have on hand. Rice. And finally, dessert. I know we think, there's nothing good that we can have that's sweet. Well, dark chocolate, when consumed in moderation, may contribute to health benefits such as boosting the good cholesterol and lowering blood pressure. Okay. So again, the key is the moderation when it comes to the dark chocolate. All right. Now we know the guidelines. We have some tips to share with families on meal preparation and planning and grocery shopping. So I want to go back to that family dinner concept and talk about the ways that a family caregiver can get their senior loved one more involved in the actual dinner. And that's on the next slide. Now, sometimes people may avoid these family meals because it can be uncomfortable. How many times have you been at a dinner where there's a senior there of some sort? Maybe it's your grandparent, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a relative, I don't know. And they're at the table and they're barely talking and you kind of feel awkward about it or uncomfortable. I know I've been in that situation before. And so, I think sometimes people are worried about that happening, and so maybe this is why they're avoiding the family dinner. Well, so let's look at some of these tips. Like, first of all, choosing a recipe or preparing a nostalgic meal. That's a great tip for families. It automatically involves the senior because it's probably their recipe or from their family. And it really helps the senior stay connected to their past. It brings back memories, brings back happy times, and maybe they can tell a story or two about the meal or how they learned to cook it or the time they made this meal, this story happened. So it's, again, thinking about preparing a nostalgic meal. Also involving the senior with meal preparations. We've talked about involving them in the cooking and the grocery shopping. Again, involving them with preparations is important. There's lots of tasks that they can do to probably like my grandmother needed help getting the turkey out of the oven, but for the most part she could do lots of different things still in the kitchen, even into her later years. So just keeping them involved. Also, set the senior at the table where they're most likely to participate in a conversation. So sit them next to someone that would engage with them or somebody they relate well with, or maybe somewhere in the middle so that they can hear the conversation. A lot of times that can be a problem, when you're in a kind of a big dinner table or even a few people. It's kind of hard to hear sometimes. Invite the senior to share stories. And I would even have family members sort of even come prepared with some of those ideas and talk about some of those topics. I was recently with my family on a vacation, and I noticed my uncle wasn't talking very much, but he had made a comment about his dad, my grandpa, who I had never met. He passed away before I was born. And I just said, Uncle Bob, tell me a story about Grandpa George when he was, doing this or whatever example I used. And to make a long story short, I could not get him to stop talking about. And, my Uncle Bob is he's 70. He's not as an older, like an 80 or 90-year-old, but still just reaching out and bringing up a topic and getting people to share stories, it can go a long way. The other great idea is to really, if there's any children in the group, ask them to make something special for the senior. Maybe it's a handmade card or a school project, just anything little that they could come prepared to give the senior. That little thing can go a long way, that little trinket or little invitation or little card, whatever it might be. Okay, there's a few more tips on the next slide that are helpful for the family caregiver. And this is when we talked about how family caregivers, if they don't have the time, or they've got their own family, or they've got a full-time job and or both. So we've got to consider a grocery shopping or delivery service. That's one thing. A lot of our grocery stores now, at least in my area, you can make a phone call, give them your list, and then somebody can come and just pick up the order, or they'll even deliver the order. Asking neighbors or friends to help. I think it's hard for our family caregivers to ask for help, but even a neighbor, it's summer and school's out. Are there neighborhood kids that might be able to help and do some shopping or pick up a couple things at the store here and there? Just getting creative and thinking of ways and encouraging our family members that it's okay to ask for help. Another option is setting up home care services or a companion or hiring a caregiver. Lots of those, Home Instead and a lot of those companies, they can just come in and do that. They can buy the food, prepare a meal, and just do as simple as that little bit of a task if that's the challenge. And then Meals on Wheels is another great option. We talk about that a lot on these webinars and what a great resource that is. So encouraging Meals on Wheels to be delivered. And also maybe talking to the area or the groups that the senior may be participated in, if it's their church, if it's a senior center, the YMCA, even looking at those kind of organizations. They might have senior meal programs, or they might have community events that are, a lunchtime or a dinner spaghetti feed or fish fry or whatever it might be. There's just some ways to, get seniors some additional options for good home-cooked meals or good hot meals. Okay, we're running a little bit low on time, so I'm going to keep going here, but I want to go to the next slide and start talking about some of those nutritional nuances or diseases that can affect nutrition even more, and the first one is diabetes. Now, we know that according to the American Diabetes Association, that more than 18% or 8.6 million Americans age 60 or older have diabetes. Okay, and so there's some unique challenges when you're a senior and you're trying to manage diabetes. There are some changes in where moderation's the key, carbohydrate control, and really got to be honed in on those healthy eating choices. So people with diabetes need to focus on foods that are high in fiber, that are nutrient dense. These are usually those plant foods and most dairy products, lean meats, poultry, and fish. And diabetes, they need to keep those highly processed foods to a minimum and all that refined flour and sugar to a minimum. Those are the kind of the bad carbs that they need to watch out for. Now, the Diabetes Association has tons of guidelines, especially they have a great guide for adults 55 and plus. And they have I'm just going to share a couple of tips with you because there's just so many, and I encourage you to go to their website and look at it. But it's starting a meal with a salad or a broth-based soup, choosing veggies and fruits instead of fries, and avoiding those buffets. Even sharing desserts is a good tip, okay? So, again, all of those tips that I just read, they're probably good for all of us to follow, but we have to remind seniors those are some good tips, and so we tell our family members these are some ways to really help manage diabetes. Another unique challenge, a chronic illness that can cause nutritional concerns, is Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Let's look at a few tips on the next slide when Alzheimer's disease and dementia is present. First of all, we know that eating and drinking habits may change. When somebody has Alzheimer's disease or dementia, and getting a person to drink enough liquids could be a difficult task when it comes to Alzheimer's disease, and a person operating appliances can be a concern. So here's some things that we can consider. We've talked about food traditions still, even when we're talking about getting a family together, but it's also important with Alzheimer's disease. Familiar foods and food traditions can really go a long way. Finger foods is another tip to share with our family members. If they need to even pre-cut food, kind of doing that off to the side and then presenting the person with the food just to sort of help preserve that dignity. Simple table settings. People don't think about this one, but patterned dishes or patterned tablecloth and placemats, those patterns can be confusing to vision as as your vision worsens, and you don't want any of those distractions. So very simple table. And consider one dish or one food at a time. So example, if you're serving, soup and sandwiches for lunch, first eat the soup, put that away, and then go back and get the sandwich. Another tip we've learned over the years is to create that contrast on the dinner plate. If you think about it, turkey, potatoes, cauliflower, they're all kind of white. So what if you put that on a white plate? It's going to be hard for a senior with Alzheimer's disease to really see the different textures and the different food that's there. So consider one of those colorful plates. There's so many out there nowadays. Being descriptive about the food, modeling how to use utensils if somebody is not remembering how to use utensils, or adapting tableware. There's lots of those. We've talked about on the previous webinars about, those cups with lids, or using a bowl instead of a plate, or even like a thicker handled fork or knife, whatever is helpful. Okay, let's look at resources on the last slide, and then we'll open it up for questions. So again, we talked about a registered dietitian, very helpful when we're dealing with those chronic illnesses, but also just helping get tips and information on proper nutrition. We've talked about some of the websites today. The National Institute for Health has great information. I'm sure you're all aware of that one, but it's just worth mentioning again. Same with nutrition.gov and the N4A. That's where we can sign up or find the Meals on Wheels in our local communities. We also have cravingcompanionship.com, foodsforseniors.com, and caregiverstress.com. It's not up there. That's one we talk about a lot. There's lots of information up there as well for families to find resources around meals and nutrition and healthy guidelines. Okay, so I just want to take a moment and thank you all again for your time today and for learning more about this super important topic. And I hope you've taken away some good information. There's lots of information in this webinar, and I just hope you have taken away and can really convey with families how important nutrition really is, and kind of keep selling it. I know you do that a lot, so just keep on with that message to families about the importance of good nutrition and how it's often overlooked. So again, I thank you for your time, and I'd like to turn it back over to Steve and open up for questions.
All right. Thanks very much, Molly. Great presentation.
Thank you.
We would also like to welcome Erin Albers from Home Instead Senior Care to the Q&A portion, so welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, real quick question here for you, Molly. The last resource you mentioned, Caregiver Stress, can you touch on that again or just repeat that for us, please?
Yes, it's caregiverstress.com.
Okay.
It's a website with lots and lots and lots of resources, and there's a search function where you can look up a lot of different nutrition ideas, recipes, food, all kinds of things.
Okay. So first question here for you. Price is an issue with a lot of these foods, such as blueberries, dark chocolate, fish, etc. Do you have any insight or information on cheaper options?
I don't know if I have insight on cheaper options. I understand that concern myself as a person who likes blueberries, for example, and fish. I tend to buy more of the frozen packages of fruit. Yes, you do lose a little bit of that nutritional content, but they are relatively cheaper than buying fresh blueberries, for example. And as far as fish goes, I think that that's probably one of those areas you'd have to research in your community. But I'm always one I'm constantly looking for coupons in the weekly ads for the newspaper, which a lot of those can be found online now too. So I would just encourage, looking at that a little bit more. The other thing is we talked about that registered dietitian. At my local grocery store, I often see the dietitian, and she's always there. Just I can say, hey, I don't feel like fish this week, but I know I need these nutrients. What can you recommend? And she can help me. She also, at our grocery store, we have a whole section of brochures, and there'll be a little pamphlet that's all about high fiber foods and a pamphlet all about, lowering cholesterol. And it just has kind of a list of foods, and on the back it has a grocery shopping list. I have found those very, very helpful. So I would go back to the dietitian and ask some more questions about other options.
Mm-hmm. There
that might be
also,
cheaper.
Steve, some discount programs for a lot of grocery stores for seniors. So signing up for the grocer's bonus or a discount card, there's some opportunity there just to save on groceries in general.
All right, good to know. Next question, can you talk a little bit more about what kind of meals would be best for people with diabetes? Big problem in our nation these days.
Yes, it is. It really is. And, that's a great question. I wish I would have put some meal ideas. As I was looking at those, the Diabetes Association, their guidelines about starting with a salad or soup and choosing, those were great tips, but you're right. There's probably a lack of meal ideas that I presented today, and I apologize for that. But I think, again, that it's hard to recommend some of those things when you don't know what the senior's likes and dislikes are. I would encourage you to go back out to that Diabetes Association and look at that guide for adults 55 and plus and look for some recipes. And I will do that myself. And Steve, I think you send something out. Maybe I can include some ideas in something that you send out here in the next couple of days for some new ideas as well.
Yeah, diabetes.org actually has meal planning for people with diabetes. And then there's also through Prevention Magazine, their website does a really good job. They actually have a 5-week diabetes diet meal plan. So there is a lot of stuff out there, and I believe that the geriatric nutritionist working for Homestead is in the process of developing recipes as well. So those will live on caregiverstress.com.
Oh, great. Thanks, Erin.
Uh-huh.
Okay, earlier you were talking about some of the conversation starters for which to address some of the issues surrounding what we've been talking about. Can you talk a little bit more about some of those starters for us?
When I talk about conversation starters or opening conversations, one of the biggest keys is how to just the right approach on how to even bring up the topic. And I think that we need to encourage our family members to really think about it, and I think they should even practice on each other. Because it's one thing to say, Mom, you look like you've lost 10 pounds. I can't believe it. What are you doing? When it's quite another to say, Mom, I've noticed that your clothes are a little baggy today. How's everything going? How are you feeling? Are you trying to lose weight? So it's just the tone, and it's just the words you choose, and even tone is huge. And I think a lot of our family caregivers get in this mode of just fix. We have to fix things, and we have to take care of everything, when really we need to stop and pause and have a nice, calm conversation, maybe even over a meal, in a non-threatening manner. So when you think about conversation starters, it's really put yourself in the situation and completely relax and calm down about it before, even though you're nervous or upset. It's sort of like taking a moment away and coming back to the conversation so that you can be more calm and have it. So I don't actually have I don't think there's words. I think it's just a state of mind, or it's a new concept about thinking about this open conversation and not being accusatory and not panicking. And, even though the family caregiver, it's so hard to do because they're just worried, and that's why they're talking the way they are or saying what they're saying. But it's just a matter of trying to understand, seeking to understand, instead of just jumping right in and getting into this mode of fixing. So I think that if you could take that away and encourage family members to seek to understand, really seek to understand first, that can go a long way.
All right. Well, Molly, we have reached the end of our hour here, and we are just about out of time. But I want to thank you for joining us today, as well as Erin Albers from Home Instead Senior Care. Thank you for another fantastic presentation with us today.
Thank you, and thank everybody for joining.